Star Trek Enterprise undid one of DS9's funniest moments 8 years later, but it kind of had to. Star Trek Deep Space Nine, 1993 to 1999, was often the most irreverent of the franchise's classic era shows. Between its serialized political storylines and heavy moral themes, DS9 frequently found humor in poking fun at Starfleet's history, especially the more primitive days of the 22nd and 23rd centuries. One of the funniest examples of this came in the fan-favorite Season 5 episode, Trials and Tribulations, when the DS9 crew traveled back in time to the events of the original series, The Trouble with Tribbles. There, Worf delivered one of Star Trek's most memorable deadpan lines, explaining why Klingons in Kirk's era looked completely different. We do not discuss it with outsiders. For years, that single line became a self-aware, franchise-defining joke, a wink to the audience that embraced Star Trek's evolving production values while never needing a full explanation. But in 2005, Star Trek Enterprise made the bold decision to undo that mystery completely. In its two-part arc, Affliction and Divergence, the prequel series explained exactly what happened to the Klingons' forehead ridges, removing the mystique behind Worf's legendary quip. And yet, in context, Enterprise kind of had to do it. The DS9 joke that became Star Trek legend. When Deep Space Nine's Trials and Tribulations aired in 1996, it was meant as both a celebration of Star Trek's 30th anniversary and a loving homage to the original series. The episode's time travel conceit allowed DS9's crew to literally step into the grainy, brightly colored world of Kirk and Spock, using cutting-edge digital compositing to insert them into original TOS footage. But among all the nostalgia and humor, it was Worf's quiet discomfort about the Klingons that stole the show. When Bashir and O'Brien notice the TOS Klingons' smooth foreheads, the two humans are confused. They don't look like any Klingons they've ever seen. The exchange that follows is perfectly delivered. Greater than Bashir. Those are Klingons? O'Brien. What happened to their heads? Worf. Grimly, we do not discuss it with outsiders. That moment instantly became Star Trek canon comedy gold. It acknowledged one of the franchise's oldest continuity questions, why the Klingons' appearance changed so drastically from the original series to the next generation, without ruining the fun by over-explaining it. The joke worked because everyone knew the real reason. In the 1960s, the show had a limited makeup budget and relied on darker skin tones, mustaches, and arched eyebrows to signify alien menace. When Star Trek, the motion picture, arrived in 1979, makeup designer Fred Phillips finally gave the Klingons the elaborate ridged foreheads we now associate with the species. The visual upgrade made sense from a production standpoint. Star Trek had more money and better technology, but in universe, the transformation was never explained. DS9's writers knew that fans noticed the difference and decided to turn that inconsistency into a punchline. The beauty of Worf's delivery was that it made the lack of an explanation part of the lore. It gave the franchise permission to laugh at itself and to let the mystery stand. Enterprise's prequel mandate. Fast forward 8 years later, and Star Trek was facing a creative identity crisis. By 2005, Star Trek Enterprise was struggling in its fourth and final season. The show had spent its first 3 years experimenting with standalone adventures and continuity-light storytelling. But ratings were falling, and fans weren't connecting with it the way they had with DS9 or Voyager. Enter writer-producer Manny Coto, who took over showrunning duties in Season 4. Coto had a clear vision to make Enterprise a true prequel that tied directly into established Star Trek history. His approach was to treat the series as a bridge between the 22nd century Starfleet and the world of Kirk and Spock. That meant diving into the origins of familiar species, technologies, and even the beginnings of the Federation itself. Under Coto's leadership, Enterprise began producing dense continuity arcs that filled in long-standing gaps in the lore. There was the Vulcan Reformation trilogy explaining how the logic-driven Vulcans of TOS evolved. The Augments arc connecting genetically enhanced humans to Konunian Singh. And finally, the Affliction/Divergence two-parter that addressed, once and for all, why the Klingons of TOS looked human. In that sense, the show wasn't trying to spoil Worf's joke. It was fulfilling its mission, to make sense of Star Trek's sprawling, sometimes contradictory canon. How Enterprise explained the Klingon foreheads. In Enterprise's Affliction, Dr. Phlox and the NX-01 crew discover a new medical crisis within the Klingon Empire. A deadly virus is sweeping through their population, causing genetic mutations and threatening to wipe out the species. The cause, as Phlox learns, comes from a desperate Klingon experiment. Klingon scientists had stolen human augment DNA, leftovers from the genetic research used by Erikson Brent Spiner, and attempted to engineer stronger warriors. But the experiment went horribly wrong. The augment DNA not only failed to make the Klingons stronger, it caused a disfiguring collapse of cranial ridges and a breakdown of respiratory function. In short, the virus that spread through the Klingon Empire effectively de-evolved them, creating a generation of smooth four-headed Klingons that would eventually become the ones seen in the original series. By the end of the arc, Phlox develops a cure that stops the mutation spread, but he warns that the physical effects will remain for generations. The explanation retroactively fits perfectly. It accounts for why TOS Klingons appear human, why the difference is never discussed in later eras, and even why modern Klingons in Discovery and Strange New Worlds vary so widely in design. The genetic legacy lingered. Still, to many fans, Enterprise's solution felt like overkill. It turned one of Star Trek's most delightfully unexplained gags into clinical sci-fi exposition. Why Enterprise had to explain it? The irony is that Enterprise's choice made perfect sense within its creative framework. Season 4's job was to tie the franchise's loose ends into a coherent timeline, and ignoring one of the most glaring inconsistencies in Trek history would have been a missed opportunity. Star Trek fans, by nature, love explanations. Canon coherence has always been part of the fandom's fun, and Enterprise leaned into that passion. The Klingon virus arc wasn't just about cosmetic continuity, it was about connecting themes across centuries of storytelling. For example, the idea that the Klingons would tamper with genetics echoes their cultural fear of weakness and obsession with honor. Their use of augment DNA mirrored humanity's own mistakes with eugenics, reinforcing Star Trek's long-running moral that the pursuit of physical perfection often leads to ethical corruption. On top of that, Enterprise's explanation didn't completely erase Worf's joke. If anything, it made it richer. When Worf says, "We do not discuss it with outsiders," his silence now carries the weight of historical shame. The Klingons' genetic blunder was so catastrophic that it became taboo in their culture, a mark of dishonor buried for centuries. The line, once purely comedic, gained tragic subtext. So while Enterprise technically undid DS9's funniest moment, it did so in a way that deepened the lore instead of cheapening it. The shift from mystery to meaning. What's fascinating about the Klingon Forehead saga is how it mirrors Star Trek's own evolution as a franchise. Deep Space Nine celebrated mystery and humor. It was content to let history be fuzzy, using ambiguity to strengthen character and theme. Enterprise, on the other hand, came from a different creative moment. One where audiences expected serialized world-building and canon precision.